Hello. Three things I want to focus on for this particular book is 1. Israel as a Jewish state, 2. Features of classical Judaism, and 3. Jewish history. And keep in mind it was written by an Israeli Jew. Right off the bat, Israel as a Jewish state, I'm certain you've heard people refer to Israel as the Jewish state. That's not unusual, but that has a more official meaning than simply a homeland for Jews or a place for Jews to go to escape persecution. I just want to read, this is from page 3, chapter 1, A Closed Utopia. Let me begin with the official Israeli definition of the term Jewish, illustrating the crucial difference between Israel as a Jewish state and the majority of other states. By this official definition, Israel belongs to persons who are defined by the Israeli authorities as Jewish, irrespective of where they live, and to them alone. On the other hand, Israel doesn't officially belong to its non-Jewish citizens, whose status is considered even officially as inferior. This means in practice that if members of a Peruvian tribe are converted to Judaism and thus regarded as Jewish, they are entitled at once to become Israeli citizens and benefit from the approximately 70% of the West Bank land and the 92% of the area of Israel proper, officially designated only for the benefit of Jews. All non-Jews, not only all Palestinians, but all non-Jews are prohibited from benefiting from those lands. The prohibition applies even to Israeli Arabs who served in the Israeli army and reached a high rank. The case involving Peruvian converts to Judaism actually occurred a few years ago. Usually when people want to criticize Israel and talk about the second-class citizenship status of the non-Jews who live there, Israeli firsters almost immediately will talk about the number of non-Jews who serve in the Knesset, or the number of non-Jews who serve in the military, or the number of non-Jews who are government officials or rise to prominent positions within Israel, as a way to take away from the argument presented against them. But it doesn't hold any water. As I just pointed out, even Israelis who reach a high rank in the military, even non-Jewish Israelis who do that, even non-Jewish Israelis who are prominent businessmen or citizens of Israel, are treated as second-class citizens, not only compared to Jewish Israeli citizens, but Jews anywhere in the world, if they decide to come to Israel, which means a Jew from New York City, if he decides to come to Israel, is immediately granted more rights than a non-Jewish Israeli colonel or general in the Israeli military. This is the type of second-class citizenship that people refer to, and people try to tiptoe around that by pointing out the number of non-Jews who are in prominent positions. It really doesn't matter how many non-Jews are in prominent positions in Israel if those non-Jews in prominent positions are not treated as equal citizens with Jews in lower positions or Jews who aren't even in Israel at all. So when you hear someone talk about Israel being a Jewish state, that's what it means. It means it belongs to Jews no matter where they live, and it doesn't belong to non-Jews even if they live in Israel and serve Israel in the military, in the government, or what have you. Aspects of Jewish power. I think this is from chapter 4. Yeah, chapter 4, The Weight of History. 3 things I want to point out. There's 1, classical Jewish society has no peasants. 2, classical Jewish society was particularly dependent on kings or on nobles with royal powers. And 3, this is on the next page, the society of classical Judaism is in total opposition to the surrounding non-Jewish society, except the kings or the nobles when they take over the state. This was from a couple of hundred years ago when there were monarchies instead of modern states. So replace kings and nobles with presidents and prime ministers, and it will be applicable today. I want to focus on something, just the no peasants. Here's something else written. Everywhere classical Judaism has developed hatred and contempt for agriculture as an occupation and for peasants as a class, even more than for other Gentiles, a hatred of which I know no parallel in other societies. This is eminently apparent to anyone who is familiar with the Yiddish or Hebrew literature of the 19th and 20th centuries, and there's an endnote in the back. It states Nobel Prize winners Agnon and Bashevis Singer are examples of this, but many others can be given, particularly Bialik, the national Hebrew poet. In his famous poem, My Father, he describes his saintly father selling vodka to the drunkard peasants who are depicted as animals. This very popular poem, taught in all Israeli schools, is one of the vehicles through which the anti-peasant attitude is reproduced. Now, we don't use words like peasant and serf in today's society. A peasant would be a working class person. And that's like a precursor to the animosity that many within the Jewish community have for people who work with their hands, construction workers, laborers, factory workers, people who use their hands and sweat to earn a living. Some people may be a little more aware of this than others, but like the author says, pick up some Jewish literature and you'll be able to feel the animosity itself for working class folks as being someone you turn your nose up at or look down your nose at as some sort of a second-class citizen or something like that. But let me go back to where it is. The main thing I wanted to focus on was the third one, the Jewish society, or the Society of Classical Judaism, in total opposition to the surrounding non-Jewish society. It says the position of Jews is particularly favorable under strong regimes which have retained a feudal character and in which national consciousness, even at a rudimentary level, has not yet begun to develop. In fact, classical Judaism flourishes best under strong regimes which are dissociated from most classes in society, and in such regimes the Jews fulfill one of the functions of the middle class. That sounds a lot like the United States, where the ruling class is dissociated from the regular. Do you feel like you had much in common with George W. Bush? Do you feel like you have anything more in common with Barack Obama, who continue to bail out people against the wishes of the majority of the people? There's obviously a disconnect there, and it doesn't matter whether it's the neoconservatives under the George W. Bush administration or the Rahm Emanuels and so forth under the Obama administration. It's still the primarily Jewish, obviously some Gentiles, but Jewish should appoint themselves as advisors and counselors of heads of state. They've done it 200 years ago. They continue to do it today. And fulfilling one of the roles of the middle class, banking, everybody knows this, whether it's Alan Greenspan or Ben Bernanke or pretty much any former head of the Federal Reserve or any head of any central bank of any other country, without exception, to the best of my knowledge, has a Jewish head, or Paul Wolfowitz at the World Bank, right? This is one role of the middle class that the Jewish community, for the most part, again, some Gentiles obviously involved in it, but one of the functions of the middle class they've zeroed in on and taken control of. So if we look at this and compare it to modern day society, and also the multiculturalism and democracy and so forth, and no national consciousness, what you have, so far as democracy goes, politically, people pull it in different directions, so there's less unity. With the multiculturalism, you have culturally and socially people pulling in different directions, which also causes disunity. So not only is there a lack of national consciousness, but things put into place which reduce the likelihood of any real national consciousness ever arising, which means a permanent position of power for them and a permanent position of disempowerment for the rest of us. And finally, I want to talk about Jewish history. From the 11th century, the persecution of, and this was what Jews did to other Jews, the persecution of the Karaites, this is a heretical Jewish sect, by flogging them to death if unrepentant, was common in Castile. Jewish women who cohabitated with Gentiles had their noses cut off by rabbis who explained that in this way she will lose her beauty and her non-Jewish lover will come to hate her. Jews who had the effrontery to attack the rabbinical judge had their hands cut off. Adulterers were in prison after being made to run the gauntlet through the Jewish quarter. In religious disputes, those who were thought to be heretics had their tongues cut out. Sounds a lot like, remember the Salem witch trials and all the crazy things Christians used to do to not only to other Christians, but Christians they thought were witches or heretics. And also modern day in certain Islamic countries, you hear a lot of criticism about women being stoned to death for adultery or honor killings if a woman disgraces her family or something. The point I want to bring out is a lot of these anti-Christian and anti-Muslim atheists like to bring up the Salem witch trials and bring up the stoning of women in Islamic countries as a way to bash and delegitimize and point out all the things that are wrong with Christianity and Islam. I say if you're going to do that, and those things are worthy of criticism, if you're going to do that, the same level of criticism should be launched at the Jewish community, because they have taken place, or in the past, and continue to take place today. Oppressive laws against people who don't conform to the dogma of classical Judaism. And there's another chapter, but I only have 10 minutes, but it's called The Laws Against Non-Jews. I think it's the second to the last chapter. You really ought to read that one. There's all kinds of weird and crazy stuff that is just as oppressive and just as backwards as many of the laws we complain about that some Muslims practice against non-Muslims, that some Christians have practiced against non-Christians. But it gets a lot less press and a lot less criticism than the Jewish community does for doing the same or similar things in the past as well as right now. So I guess that's pretty much it. A link to a copy of this book can be found in the sidebar.